Gustav Ring. I've chosen to write poems as my horror romanticism creative work. For one of my poems, I use this picture as an inspiration. And I'm going to give a short description of the picture and what I see in it for those of you who can't see it. First of all, the picture is very dark. It's almost completely black and white, even though it has a slight green tone to it. So I guess that it's taken during the night or somewhere very dark. When looking at the picture, we can see two individuals, the first of which is a girl or maybe a young woman. Her face seems to be very close to the camera and she takes up a big part of the picture. She appears to be very scared, almost as if she's running from something. Behind her in the picture, we can see something that most people would say look like a zombie, or at least some type of human-like monster. It has its eyes locked on the girl, and it's quite clear that this is the reason to why she is terrified. And now I'm going to read the poem, even though it's not quite finished. Dusk. The last sunlight. The sound of laughter. Fading. The silhouette of trees. Her boots, one in front of the other. Her tears, wetting her cheeks. Her heart, running from loneliness. The sound of branches breaking, the longing for company, the silhouette of another. His face white, his steps composed, his eyes locked, her steps turning, his teeth showing, her legs galloping, his steps following. Her feet tripping, her mind panicking, her body wrestling. The sound of somebody fighting all the way until the end. And as you can hear, I used basically the same characters in my poem as I described in the picture. The first one was a girl, and the other one was some type of supernatural creature. I also tried to mimic the roles of the two by making the girl lonely and scared of the monster, just as in the picture. While describing the story, even though it's very short, I tried not to describe the characters too much. I did this to keep the feeling of mystery and to leave something up to the reader. This is also very similar to the picture, since it doesn't give us any background information about the girl or the monster behind it. That's it for me.
Petter Dittmer. The picture I was inspired by is a picture of a ship at night. The color scheme is blue and black almost exclusively, and the ship is giant and in the middle of the picture. In front of the ship is a big moon with a lot of clouds and things in the way. The atmosphere is very dark and like ominous and all that, so that was what made me choose this picture. I wrote a poem which is sometimes acted out in a haunted ship, so that was why I chose this picture. So now I'll read my poem. There once was a boy, no older than you and I. He spent most of his days locked in his room, where he would lie. "Rick, won't you come join us outside?" his mother would say. "We could call the cousins and have a picnic. It's a beautiful day." The boy declined, like he had done ever since young age. This time, however, his mother's eyes filled with rage. "I did not raise you just so you can throw away your life living like a dirty slob. Get out of this house and go find yourself a job." He whipped and pleaded, but to no avail. Holding back his tears, he started to shamble down the motionless road. "I'll go down to the harbor," he thought, and soon spotted a dark, ragged sail. He spoke to one of the sailors by the ship, and was soon helping them deload. The ship looked to be over 100 years old, and its name, Lazarus, was written across the hull in fading gold. There was something about it that didn't feel right. He couldn't put his finger on what, but all the same it filled him with fright. Was it the way the wind made the chains rattle and squeak, or was it how seemingly nothing would make the floorboards creak? Repressing his fears, he accepted the sailor's job offer. He was shown to his cabin, which contained only a bunk and a mysterious coffer. The hour was late, and within a few minutes he was sound asleep. The ship was quiet, as it out to sea slowly would creep. He woke up to a clattering sound on deck. It's probably just a rat, he thought, but he didn't dare to go check. He managed to finally muster up the courage to go. He got as far as the ladder, all the while keeping his head low. While climbing up, he accidentally let out a loud sneeze. The sound was enhanced by the narrow corridor and echoed out over the seas. He froze, horrified, and anxiously listened for anything to react, praying to God that he would leave the scene intact. He felt a rotten breath on the back of his head. He turned around, almost completely engulfed in dread. The captain was only a few inches from his face, his eyes blank and dead. His flesh was rotten and decayed, and his ragged clothes were stained red. "Welcome to my ship, recruits," the captain slowly said, and hit the poor boy over the skull with a stick of lead. When Rick woke up, he was washed over with relief. It was just a dream, he thought, but the illusion would be brief. He tried the door and was shocked. The door was locked. For hours he would pound and scream, rage turning into despair in his bloodstream. After a day or so he quit, and simply walked to his bed to sit. There once was a boy, now much older than you and I. He spent his days locked in a room where he would lie, just waiting to die.
Matilda Alm. This is the painting that has inspired me. It is a painting of a forest, but not an ordinary one. In the middle, there's an enormous tree with no life in it. Its roots are as big as the branches, and the ground that it's based on is filled with pointy rocks, and they look threatening. It is not just that it's dead that separates it from the rest of the trees. It's also that it's bigger than the others. And the way it is built up reminds me of a leaf tree, even though the very leaves are no longer there. Since it's a coniferous forest, it makes this tree a little supernatural, as the only one of its kind. In the background, a storm is coming up. The clouds are in dark shades of grey, and a firebolt is spreading its light around itself. It looks like the weather is better a bit away from the trees, and that's another scary impact on the picture. Once again, it makes me think of supernaturality. The fact that it's conifer trees makes me think of colder weather, and the dark sky reminds me of rainy autumns with moist soil and the smell of firs. What made me choose this specific one is the supernatural tree in the middle. Something has happened to it, and whether it was lightning or poisoning or something else, it killed it. Death is something that I find scary, and since scary should be the theme of this short story, I consider the death of this tree as the perfect source of inspiration. Also, a storm is raging in the background, and what isn't more terrifying than a storm and the forest in combine? When I was younger, I loved climbing in trees. The bigger, the better. The first thing that struck me when I saw this picture was a child's view of the scenery. It would probably love to climb those branches and roots. Trees, tree climbing, death and storm is what inspired me the most in this painting, and it's also the keywords in my short story. The story is about two different children in two different eras, but on the exact same location, and they both sleepwalk. Some kind of traction pulls the first one of the children, Annie, to the tree when a terrible storm is raging the forest. It's a dangerous situation, and what happens next will be terrifying for the girl and her surroundings, but also the boy who lives 100 years later. With that said, I'd like to read the first few paragraphs for you. The young little girl stood completely still, staring at the other branch. The tree was magnificent with its at least 100-year-old crown. Summer was just about to lose its annual battle against autumn, and the leaves on the trees shifted in orange and red. It would have been a beautiful sight if it wasn't for the awful storm that shook the clutter this night. The girl, Annie was her name, kept on staring at the branch. It was thinner and weaker than the one she stood on, and she was afraid it would break if she jumped. While thinking about jumping or not, Annie didn't notice the rumbling thunder that had broke loose in the sky. She also didn't notice how cold her tiny body was, and how her pajamas were dripping wet because of the rain. Her surrounding lit up in a dazzling white light once again, but she kept on thinking about the branch. Thunder spread its deep voice in the air while she asked herself to jump or not to jump. Jump! Bursted the voice in her head, and so she jumped. Her feet finally felt the pitting wood, but she never got to know if the branch could hold her. The exact moment Annie's body got in contact with the tree again, lightning struck it, and a scream mixed thunder shook the area.